All right, so welcome back to The Young Idealist and my ongoing series on classical German philosophy and, of course, post-Kantian thought. Moving on from my last episode from Edith Stein, we're going to continue focusing on women philosophers, and today I have a very special guest. Randolph Dible, who is a lecturer in the philosophy at St. Joseph University and Suffolk County Community College in New York, and a doctoral student in philosophy at the New School for Social Research. His work is in ontological phenomenology, history, philosophical ideas, ancient Greek philosophy. He is the book series editor of Marked States series on form through college publications. He is the co-editor of Laws of Form, a 50th anniversary. His chapter in the volume is entitled First Philosophy and the First Distinction, Ontology and Phenomenology of Laws of Form. Randolph is also founding co-editor of the new journal of the Spencer Brown Society, Distinction, Journal of Form. He is a co-host of the North American Society of Early Phenomenology speaker series available on YouTube, and former director of the webinar for the Society for Phenomenology of Religious Experience 2020. Chapters on Hedwig Conrad-Martius, entitled Hedwig Conrad-Martius, Christer Realismus, forthcoming, and Husserliana, expected 2025, as well as Autopoiesis, Autopoiesis, and the Calculus intended for self-reference, forthcoming, and Analecta Husserliana, anticipated for 2025, as well as Universal Ontology and the First Distinction, Spencer Brown, Husserl, and Conrad-Martius's Distinction, Journal of Form, College Publications, anticipated for 2025, and as well as a dissertation entitled Universal Ontology of the Infinite Sphere. So thank you so much for being here. Can I call you Randy?
Absolutely.
And you are going to help navigate us through the very complex and wonderful philosophy of Conrad Martius. So maybe you can start off by telling us why Conrad Martius's philosophy is important for us today in both phenomenology and in philosophy, and why you think there's perhaps so much more attention now coming to her work.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this wonderful introduction. And thank you for having me here. I hope to right now respond to your question by making it I'll give you like a normal answer and then I'll give you like my inner opinion, which is totally abnormal. So the normal response I think is she's important because not only is she connected so intimately with Edith Stein, who's a very important philosopher in general, but also a saint in the Catholic Church, canonized and beatified by John Paul II in the 90s, and is also a patron saint of Europe and now being considered for Doctor of the Church. I mean, she's got like an important status, Edith Stein. But as at some point, I hope to make clear their relationship is actually a really interesting episode in the history of these figures and of phenomenology in general. So there's their relationship. But yeah, Conrad Martius is one of these women of early phenomenology. And in fact, if we're talking specifically about, Husserlian early phenomenology, she is the original one. Edith Stein comes the year after Hedwig Conrad-Martius leaves Göttingen, and so they didn't meet then, but they met later and became fast friends. And yeah, we'll get into their story a bit more. And then later, there's Gerda Walther, who was also at a time a student of Edith Stein. But basically, Conrad Martius, Edith Stein, and Gerda Walther are the three like really important early women phenomenologists. But you see, Conrad Martius was Edith Stein's inspiration. At one point, she did describe it as, she heard about Conrad Martius and really followed her example and continued on to study with Husserl and to have this conversion with Conrad Martius there as her patron and her inspiration, and then their influences really dovetail a lot. They influenced each other mutually, but also in many ways, Conrad-Martius had a very interesting, very powerful philosophy, which, as you mentioned, is complex, but I hope to make it clear as well, simple and intuitive, because it really is a clear picture, that's simple and intuitive and really all applicable, and in a way turns her very, specific brand of philosophy, which is ontological phenomenology, a mouthful, right? Into this new strange winged creature that is philosophy, unlike we've even seen in the past or today, especially. I mean, especially today. I mean, academic philosophy is is it's what it is, but it could be this really really interesting, powerful device that combines all the powers of science and mathematics and just ideation or intellection, thinking in general. And philosophy in the hands of Conrad-Martius becomes something really magical. And if we follow her prescriptions, her path, her very specific one sole method, technique that she's carrying through her career in all these complex ways and all these numerous multiple fields, we can really see how philosophy itself as this whole discipline can transform the world in a way that we can't even like imagine. Yeah, my opinion is that when we follow her path of the real ontology, the ontology of reality that leads to what she later develops, which is the goal of real ontology, which is called universal ontology, we will have a new paradigm, a new way of thinking, not only philosophy, but the sciences and human life, human culture, in a really profound economy of thought, and it's really just a matter of like taking her project, helping her like complete what she was working on, and seeing it through. And if we see it through and we apply her method, we use her method, we have a new way of seeing ourselves and the world. And this really builds a new world, creates a new future for humanity, unlike we can imagine. Because today is really really ridiculous. And it seems like there's really no solution. It's it's a messed up world. And not just that it's fallen like in a Christian sense. She is a Christian mystic, okay, but she's using Christianity to get to like the real truth, the real import of philosophy, which transcends all like regions and religions, all different ways of thinking, because it's the truth, because it's reality, and that's what we want. That's what we in our heart of hearts, that's what we want. So that's, I think, very much what Conrad-Martius has to contribute to the world. And she's, obviously because of patriarchy is a huge factor. I mean, she had her life circumstances of being in Germany before and during the wars, and later the Nazi publication ban applied to her. She's a woman. She couldn't get jobs. I mean, there are institutional misogynistic things, but generally, like, the patriarchy is like this huge, huge thing that is really the reason these women philosophers, and there are women philosophers throughout history, that need to come to the foreground more. And there are many contributions to philosophy that will not only like totally transform the canon in a way you can imagine, but can really like help heal humanity, and bring the projects of thinking in general to this new plateau or a new landing in the development of humanity. And of course we can't see that because it's the next, horizon, the next frontier, so we can't quite imagine what that's like, but we can get a little bit of the idea, I think, of it today.
I think that's a wonderful and very rich answer. And also, I have to say that your energy is fantastic. I can feel it. And your excitement just about talking about um, Conrad-Martius. So thank you so much for that. You brought up a little bit of facts about her life. I was wondering if maybe we could now kind of maneuver to a kind of brief biography. Like, as I say to most of my guests, it does not have to be an expansive biography, but just maybe the main events. So
Yeah.
throughout your life?
Yeah, so her years, okay, are um uh, 1888 to 1966. So those are her years. Um so she was born in 1888, and when she turned 15 years old, um her father gave her for her birthday a copy of Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Kant, Spinoza, these are huge important influences for her early on. Okay, and that, she's a woman, uh who's an intellectual, and like any intellectual, wants to be a part of the discussion, and to use the resources. Resources aren't just books and stuff. They're also like institutional. And of course, people who the society at the time determines, could and should be taking those roles of like philosopher, professor, and so on. So there's all sorts of struggles that she faced throughout her life. In order to go to college in the first place, she had to study in Berlin at a special school for girls, the Helen Lange um, school for girls. So she went here. This is a lot of work. She had her regular school day, and then she continued um, her school day at the institute. The tests and stuff were administered by these men who, the way she describes it, were against women succeeding in
Wow.
in education. This is a story she largely recounts in her 1958 Order of Merit. She became an honorary professor of philosophy at Munich at that year, and she tells the story of like, what is it, like 30 women, like 12 made it through, and
Wow.
only like a handful of those were able to make it through, with like their Abitur. It was like not a great situation, but she made it through that. Okay, so she's smart, but she's also brilliant. She went to school in Berlin, her like, secondary school, and then she went to University of Rostock. Um, Her father was a medical dude, and so she was at first she studied medicine and yeah, literature, and she wrote some creative works and stuff, and finally she studied philosophy, and she went to Munich, and she impressed her professors. Geiger wrote that she was the most brilliant of his students in his letter to Husserl, where he then sent her. So she went to go study Husserl. She got the bug from Geiger, Fonder, these guys. Theodor Lips, who's like the earlier generation, more like Husserl's, generation. Um, he was making phenomenology a big thing in Munich at the time, in the Psychologische Gesellschaft there, and she was a part of that. And so Geiger wrote to Husserl, sent her there, and she studied under Husserl at Göttingen, the winter semester of 1910 to 1912. Towards the end of that, at the 100th anniversary of the University of Göttingen, they had an essay contest, and it was like anonymous submission, and she submitted like her dissertation. She beat like really amazing many other candidates, right? Men. Was revealed who the winner was, um everyone was totally shocked that a woman did this, so anyway, she won this incredible acclaim, um also kind of sensational because she's a woman, and but this also allowed her like international headlines, so she was already like really internationally known for her intellectual work. Yeah, she was studying under Husserl, and she attended a number of lectures that became the material for books that we know, that we phenomenologists are familiar with, titles um, like the basic problems of phenomenology, um, logic and general theory of science. Um, so so she was there, um, one of the original people in the lecture for these Husserl books that we're familiar with, which is cool. And it also helps us to like get an idea of like, how she was inspired, specifically. She became a member then of the Göttingen circle of phenomenologists. Um, and Adolf Reinach was an important figure for those people of that particular that generation of the Göttingen circle. He was the Privatdozent for Husserl at the time, so they had Husserl and Reinach as their like major influences there. Um, but other folks were there, like studied with Shaler. She ended up marrying uh, Theodor Lip's nephew, Theodor Conrad. Another student there in the Göttingen circle at the time was Hans Lips. So anyway, like there's a whole slew of really interesting, powerful philosophers studying under Husserl at the time, and this is what's called early phenomenology. There's an earlier bit as well, a bit um, before this like 1910 period. Um, and then there's more afterwards as well, like Edith Stein, studying under Husserl. She becomes Privatdozent for Husserl as well, and she famously edits the Inner Time Consciousness lectures and many others as well. And then Heidegger takes that over later on when he becomes Privatdozent. Um, so anyway, these are the sorts of names and figures and relations around that time. So that's kind of like a sort of picture of early phenomenology, specifically of the like Göttingen circle. And there's some famous photographs of all of them, and she's the woman in the middle. So it's all these guys, and there's a woman in the middle with a big black brimmed hat, like a halo. So it's kind of a really cool picture of Conrad-Martius. And then those are all the like really famous philosophers that we phenomenologists study. So 1910 to 1912, she studied uh, directly under Husserl, and then in 1912, she won that prize and graduated. Had another hiccup with the institution. The like dissertation awarding committee, they found a reason to not let her dissertate there. And the reason was that she didn't have Greek in her secondary school education, because the curriculum in Berlin, like it just didn't do that for women. So they used that. Okay. So that was lame. Like Husserl was supporting her, but the other folks didn't. So anyway, she took that material, which was the prize material, and she brought it back to Munich, and under Alexander Fonder, she was able to get her dissertation. And she married Theodor Conrad in 1912, like the next month after she graduated, and they bought an orchard, this place called Bad Bergzabern in Germany on the like French-German border, and they moved there. And that's where they lived. And then there's like this whole other period after that called the Bergzabern Circle, which is centered on their house, which, for example, das Phenomenologenheim. So the House of Phenomenology, the Phenomenology House, and and I got to go there last year, actually. Joaquin Feldes, he gave us like a tour of like all the sacred Edith Stein sites. I hosted a big conference in the Netherlands, and then I went down to that area, Speyer and Bad Bergzabern, which I've always wanted to go there. The Phenomenology House. Who wouldn't want to go there, right? So the house was occupied. We couldn't like go in or whatever, but he gave us a tour, told us all about it. He wrote the book. The term itself um, comes from Eberhard Ave-la-Lamont, like another like circle of phenomenology, right? There's like the Göttingen circle, the Freiburg circle later on when Husserl goes to Freiburg, but this one, the Bergzabern circle, it's made up of Conrad-Martius and Theodor Conrad, and von Zibbel was there, and Edith Stein joined them. That's where Conrad-Martius and Edith Stein did a lot of their work together in the 1920s. They brought like the Adolf Reinach died in the First War, and they took his Nachlass there. They started a like phenomenology library, and hosted scholars, and so they had like an orchard that like during the war they like reoriented to like get fruit or whatever they grew, to the efforts and that kind of thing. But yeah, it was like a pretty sustainable place to be for her. And she had like book contracts. She worked on stuff. Her husband really like supported her intellectual activity. Um, and there was a lot. So if you go to like the Open Commons of Phenomenology and click Hedwig Conrad-Martius, see there's a huge list of her output, books and articles, and so like maybe the last part of her like biographical story, she had a student who was also like a sometimes they use the word like personal assistant. I think this means like a student, prime student or whatever. Eberhard Ave Lallemant, who fell in love with her philosophy and collected all her works and put them together, and that's the 3 volume Schriften of all these essays that we have of hers, um, published in like the early 1960s. So she died in 1966, and she had like many struggles and like even direct like bans from publishing at times in certain ways, but nonetheless her output was voluminous, and we got like I think I found only like one like biographical like interview with her, and someone named Sigrid Martin was a student of Husserl and Heidegger in like the one semester when the two of them overlapped in Freiburg, and she said that they included Conrad-Martius as one of their like main philosophers that they studied, and she as a student at the time, she didn't know Conrad-Martius at the time, but as a student, she thought that Conrad-Martius was like this, gaunt, like sage woman, because the way they were treating her philosophy, like it's this great work, she must be this ancient wizard, but she met her by being her neighbor, and she met her and said that she was like immediately in love with her personality. She said like I would want her to be like the godmother of my children right away, and she's really like funny and good natured. And from that interview, we also hear that Conrad-Martius said about her philosophical work that she like made a joke kind of. She was like, I have like a really bad memory, and she said like, no, I'm serious. Like I look at stuff I did in the past and I wouldn't even know that I did it and stuff. Just always did the same thing all along, which is really curious, um, because she did so much and in so many diverse ways, in so many like numerous fields of different sciences. And all along, really, she was applying the real ontological method, her signature method, which is something that originally she picked up from Husserl. She made it her own, and it's the study, the essence investigation, the essence research, the essence study, the eidetic phenomenology of, in particular, real being or reality. And so this is called the real ontology, the ontology of reality. And this is something that Husserl as well mentions here and there, and situates it in relation to like material ontology, formal ontology, etc., and even universal ontology. Um, and then later, her at the towards the end of her career, like from as early as like 1939, 1940s, but especially later, she writes more about this universal ontology, which is sort of like the goal, culmination, the synthesis of her whole project. So she did a lot, but as she said in the interview, she was just really doing like one thing applied to everything, So that's kind of like what she said. I hope to also make clear the one
I
thing.
think you did a really wonderful job. The funny thing is that when I was doing my undergraduate, phenomenology for me, or phenomenology, the phenomenology that I taught us was Husserl, Heidegger, Levinas, Merleau-Ponty, and the only pilgrimage that anyone could ever think was Totnoberg and the cabin, and Heidegger's cabin, and
Yeah.
reading the background story about the apple orchard and hearing you bring this up is just amazing at the amount of thinkers and people that were working in this early phenomenological period. And I felt almost kind of sad that I didn't know any of these thinkers. And so I've been really trying to reread these thinkers because my entire life for the last 7 years has been Kant to Schelling, and I have known nothing past like Heidegger. So all of these wonderful, rich thinkers, of course, Stein and Martius and Gerda Wolters and many other these thinkers are so important. So I'm really trying to, grasp all of them. But I love this idea of like an apple orchard, like a phenomenological output, a place, like their own library, their own work where they can come there, pick apples and talk about phenomenology. I think this is just amazing,
I
unbelievable.
guess I should also add that one other important thing that they were doing there, and this is maybe also kind of connected to the Edith Stein conversion story. In the 1920s, they were also putting on plays. They were writing literary work and putting on plays that were philosophical and religious as well, spiritual. And it's my imagination, my reconstruction of this, and I hope history will show us once Conrad-Martius, is really out there and published and translated, accessible in the English speaking world. I hope that people will deeply dive even more into her Nachlass and as well stuff buried in different universities and stuff, and discover more evidence of what really went on or what she had. But we have like one example of a play that she wrote, and they would perform these as well. And this one was called Jesus Among the Dead, and it's a cool story. It's the story of Jesus dying and going to Hades and encountering the right and left criminals or whatever, right, who were also crucified with him. And there's these characters like the Shadow, Satan appears as well, and Aristotle is there. And I mean, can you imagine? So like it's a really cool story, but this is the kind of stuff that they put on these plays. They wrote and put on these plays. And so really what that is if you're at all familiar with which I think you are a bit, like Rudolf Steiner, anthroposophy in general. These are like mystery school mystery plays, you know? I mean, it's spiritual scientific activity, a lot like anthroposophy, which I recently like really got into, seeing how Conrad-Martius is really doing a lot of spiritual science, as she even calls her own work at certain point.
As you were talking about that, I was like, my mind was being drawn to like Dante's Inferno and phenomenology, a phenomenological inferno, right? Unbelievable.
Yeah.
If you had to bring up the very multiple and multifaceted, layered influence of Conrad-Martius's philosophical influence, who are her main figures? Um, that helped shape this wonderful and rich philosophical corpus that she has.
Okay, I'll do my normal abnormal thing again. So the normal answer is obviously Husserl, right? And Husserl in a twofold way. Okay, so she was directly his student. She followed religiously the whole eidetic phenomenology, as did all the Göttingen students. I mean, a lot of them came from Munich, from the Munich circle, from Geiger and Lips, from like a psychological perspective, but they were really into this idea in the logical investigation of depsychologizing mathematics and the sciences. So positivism, a la Ernst Mach, Cornelius, Avenarius. These are the figures that Husserl mentions in extensively in logical investigations. In the beginning of it, he goes into a detail about all of their types of neo-Humean positivism. And famously, there in the logical investigations, he says, but we phenomenologists, we are the true positivists. So, like, we're even more positivistic than the positivists. And this is so relevant today, because modernity in general, from the perspective of like critiques of modernity, but also just like today, like our contemporary world, if you look around at the academy and the things that are happening in the sciences, on the one hand, there's like the romantic spirit of these ideas and these sciences and philosophy and everything. But on the other hand, there's this like desire to naturalize, it's like a materialist tendency, right? and even this distinction, which is just a heuristic device, a binary distinction that in any particular case breaks down, but nonetheless is a device that we can use, like continental and analytic philosophy. I mean, it's like true in a very general sort of way, but if you look at any particular thinker, maybe you'll find some like really serious people who belong to these things, but there are different forces working in us. And Conrad-Martius, I hope we'll get to the point where we can see, thinks of all of creation, as she calls it, all the world, and all phenomena as consisting of these cosmic forces, and they can be, and she does, for a very powerful effect. She makes this broad, sweeping distinction, in a very binary way, um, in order to highlight that these forces are coming, from the cosmos. They have different characteristics, different qualities that are really, really wide. Okay, but that kind of stuff, things that characterize her philosophy in all these weird, interesting ways, is coming from what I would call like the fruits of her research. And it's really the method. So there's the fruits, all the stuff she discovers about the nature of like the metaphysics of reality and existence and ideas and absolutely everything, she calls it. Schlechten alles, absolutely everything, an ontology of absolutely everything. These are the fruits, but the method is the essence of reality, the essence investigation of real being. Okay, so that's common. That's the common chord throughout all of this stuff. But yeah, she comes up with all these fascinating results, following this method in different contexts. Husserl was a big influence directly, okay, but also here's the twofold thing I'm referring to. There's this idea in phenomenology called the schism, the early phenomenological schism. These students were really, really religiously into Husserl, into like logical investigations, into we are the true positivists, and into eidetic phenomenology, which means like performing this eidetic phenomenological reduction and getting to the essence of things, the things themselves, right? And um, and then applying this to different areas, different regions, and developing these regional ontologies. And so this is kind of like the research program, right? The early research program of phenomenology is essence research, eidetic phenomenology. Um, so this is, you know, we're parallel with Husserl on this. All the students are, on the same page. But then in 1910, Ideas is published. Ideas Volume 1 comes out. There's a lot there as well that influenced these people, including Conrad-Martius. They were into it, but at the same time, in that book, Husserl revealed he wants to like turn that kind of work, eidetic phenomenology, into more this new thing he's expanding upon, transcendental phenomenology. Okay, this is like the science of the immanent structures of consciousness, right? It's still the science of essences, but it's different, right? It's transcendental phenomenology. So as Husserl shifts his attention, his focus into transcendental phenomenology, which also is his period when he's bringing in more a Kant, or he's studying Kant himself. He's getting more like Kantian idealist, right? These early students who are students of Husserl and also very much influenced by Reinach, who's called the real philosopher, the real phenomenologist, because he's into realism, right? And is emphasizing the importance of all these types of eidetic research for the study of reality and development of metaphysics and everything. There's this turn in Husserl to transcendental phenomenology. Okay, and even as early as uh, I think we were able to date this early work of Conrad-Martius to like 1913 or maybe 16, or there's this little essay called On Ontology, Über Ontologie. Conrad-Martius is very clear that what she wants to do is this different kind of phenomenology, um, that is in fact based on this phenomenological reduction that's the opposite of the transcendental reduction. Okay, so there's both like this influence directly of Husserl and a big breaking from Husserl, so that they're like going in opposite directions. Even so far that Husserl at one point like disowns these folks who don't follow him in the path of transcendental phenomenology. Folks like Eugen Fink and Ludwig Landgrabe are examples of those who like continued with Husserl in the direction of transcendental phenomenology. And then later you could say that Anna Teresa Timonetska is another important figure in the further development after Husserl of transcendental phenomenology. Um, but with her, in fact, you kind of come full circle to this stuff that early realist phenomenologists were doing. There was a very early translation of Koire's work on uh, Boma, and that she translated with Edith Stein. Actually, in Conrad-Martius's own works as well, that there's a lot of references to Boma as well, like in this recent. I know you were saying earlier you read this recently. Krüniger Schwantner translated this Metaphysical Conversations recently. This book just came out last year, and this in De Gruyter represents the first of more to come, hopefully very soon, of Conrad-Martius's works into English. Um, so I'm really looking forward to this. This is the beginning of like a new era. All along there's this influence of these guys, but it's really coming out because she was a part of this religious group, this church, the Schobdacher church. And they come from this place, this Bavarian place called Schobdach. And Franz Schmucker, it's in German, but he gives some details about that school, that church, and its influence on her. She was very much influenced spiritually by this church, and um, and all along you can detect this spirituality even in her works that are not theological. Um, yeah, so she was very familiar with these guys, with the romantic philosophers, and because she shared their spirit, which is the spirit of spirituality, because she was fundamentally a mystic.
So I think we covered a lot in this question, her influences, where her thought went. So, and I think you did a really good job of differentiating between transcendental phenomenology and the phenomenology that Conrad Martius moved away from Husserl. Maybe now we can go into this, the eidetic, and we can go into what transcendental phenomenology is and what real ontology is and all of these. Maybe we can go into this.
Two different like threefold schemas that she gives. So here's what they are. In the one case, there's like three kinds of Husserlian phenomenology. There's three kinds of like early phenomenology that she's describing in some of these essays. And one is eidetic phenomenology. The second is transcendental phenomenology, and the third is real ontology. So that's like the main schema that's helpful in distinguishing her type of phenomenology from the other types of phenomenology that Husserlian phenomenologists are familiar with. Okay, but then at other points, she associates these things with figures. And in the one case, there's Husserl and eidetic phenomenology. Okay, so she's not talking about his transcendental phenomenology right there, but it can be like a fourth one in this other schema or something. But so there's Husserl with eidetic phenomenology, and then there's Heidegger with his existential phenomenology, which is fairly different from these other things. Okay, so there's Husserl, there's Heidegger, and then there's Conrad-Martius, and so these are like different ways that she distinguishes her thinking. Um, okay, now what are they? This in this Uber ontology, um, she lays it out this way. Okay, one, there's the epistemologically oriented phenomenological bracketing of the world thesis. Um, so this is the attitude by which the phenomenologist actively suspends the natural attitude about the world's positive reality. And this is called thetic positing. Um, by a noetic act, so that and one does this so that its pure appearance can hover or float. Schweben, floating, is used here, as an epistemologically purified transcendental version of the world. This is known as the transcendental reduction. Okay, so that's a transcendental reduction. She says this is the phenomenological reduction in a narrow sense. And then two, there's the eidetic reduction. This is the phenomenological epoche, she says. The phenomenological reduction in a general sense. So here are these two kinds. The eidetic reduction, through ideation, the essence is itself freed from the flux of experience, and a certain apodicticity is secured, but there is always a remaining excess, a remainder, that transcends this scientific activity. This excess is the result of, I'm calling it an intentional myopia, an apparent blind spot of transcendental phenomenology. Um, and this is something, this excess, this remainder, is something that other phenomenologists like Merleau-Ponty, for instance, really develop in their own ways as well. Okay, so this is actually like totally relevant. This is setting up her real ontological reduction. Okay, um, so this is like hugely relevant to all the philosophies of the remainder. You know, in particular, I'm thinking I know Jacob Rogozinski. And he's a student of Michel Henry. So all that kind of stuff. Henri's very much about this as well. So okay, so this brings us to the third. The problem presented by the epistemologically purified transcendental version of the world in the immanence of absolute consciousness is the problem of how it got there originally, and how it connects to all of reality, including its own reality. And this motivates the third attitude and reduction, the real ontological. Conrad-Martius's unique contribution to phenomenological method is the polar opposite of the first, transcendental attitude and reduction. In this third reduction, the general thesis of the reality of the world is neither set aside neutrally nor negated, but fully actively posited. The real ontological attitude and reduction, in this reduction, the world is, she says, assumed to be factually real, whether it actually exists or not. There's this activity, this noetic, mental, but more specifically, like essential mental or eidetic, right? Ideas, in this sense, activity of like isolating ideas, and what she wants to do is actually push the ideas, I would say, into their reality, like they have in reality. So these are all happening like in our mind, right? All of these are phenomenological experiments, she calls them, epistemological experiments, thought experiments. But they're specifically phenomenological experimentations. And this activity has to do with isolating something. But with her thing, it's not about isolating it, but it's connecting. It's about pushing the reality of things, because our intuitive natural experience of objects around us, like this glass of water, I'm actually holding it. Okay, so you're seeing it on a screen. We're talking about it. We're all thinking about the glass of water now, but I'm actually holding it. It's here, and it has like weight and everything, right? It has all this heaviness. It's not just as it appears on the screen as a flat, bunch of pixels. No, it's got all these dimensions to it, this richness, all this latent profundity, all this depth that we ignore when we like go about our world in the natural attitude, like, oh, I'm at this 8 a.m. philosophy class, like, oh, here I am, I'm Randy, that's me, I'm a student at this school. Oh, no, 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 no. We're divine, amazing, fully real, rich bodies of things. And the real ontological reduction is about like going for that and trying to like grasp realities as they come into being. And that includes absolutely everything. Okay, so if you think of something, or even impossible objects like square circles, and mathematical entities, and fictional narratives, and sprites and gnomes, and spirits and souls and things, they all have some kind of reality. It's different in all of these cases, but they have that reality. And so what the essence investigation of reality or real being wants to do is get that, right? Grasp that. And that's actually something that we do totally normally, naturally. In fact, we even do it prior to or more primordially, more originarily than the natural scientific activity, which is empirically based. In fact, this is even more empirical. So we are the true positivists, and with the real ontological reduction, we are the true empiricists. Okay, but that also includes all the idealism and all the things that could possibly exist, includes absolutely everything. Okay, so I mean, this is the idea is there's this method, the real ontological reduction, and as you can see, it applies everywhere. Okay, and and she writes just to give one more bit of her words about what this real ontological reduction is. She says, um, in this pre-existing framework, which James Hart describes as a heuristic context, um, everything is seen or grasped, right, as it were, growing out or elevating itself from the real framework in which it participates. So, like, if I pick up this book, um, you know, it's its own thing. It's this book, right? It's this entity. I'm not confusing it with the air next to it. I'm not confusing it with the stack of books that it was on. I'm not like, oh, where did it go? It's you know what I mean? So the reality of this book is it weighs a certain amount. My body, my hand is able to pick it up, right? There's like all these factors where it came from, right? And everything. What's going to happen to it. All of this is part of the huge big picture of the cosmos, of the universe, but also something even bigger because it's a book of ideas. And this is also part of the cosmos noetos. But what is that? There's just this huge picture, I'll call it, right? The big picture of absolutely everything. And what she's doing is what all philosophers, I think, in their heart of hearts wants to do, which is to develop that picture of absolutely everything, get the big map, you know, and also to bring the territory and the map closer. In other words, the framework, the mind of the philosopher, expands, consciousness expands to include absolutely everything. And the key to it all, the key to all of this, the compass, to orient ourselves in all of this is this real ontological activity. So it's a method, yes, in a normal sort of way, like the other phenomenological methods. But my point, and I think what's in there with Conrad-Martius is that this is a very powerful magical device. I'll just say one last sentence about this because I think it's important to like really hammer in this method of the real ontological reduction. Um, Here, the real being of the world is hypothetically posited, and things shine forth in their real being and in their self-rootedness, whether they are real in the primary physical sense, dreamed, imagined, or hallucinated. Pure ontic research, that is, the ontologically essential exploration of the real world, necessitates this reduction. Okay. So that's the real ontological method, right? The real ontological reduction, and that's also kind of the spirit of it, right? The real ontological attitude, just like there's, these different attitudes, right? We're critiquing the natural attitude when we do phenomenology. Um, and the real ontological attitude is it's not, it doesn't have venery of or the parsimony of of like the scientific attitude, which is like to isolate things and to remove subjectivity to get the objectivity of nature. No, it's about like including everything and seeing that at the core of it all is you, and you're the scientist. You're the thinker, and you're able to situate yourself in this big picture. So I think that's really what it is it's a kind of a method, an attitude, but it's also like a vision, and it ends up being like a doctrine, like an invisible doctrine, a doctrineless doctrine or a doctrine of all doctrine. So it's really like it's mystical in this sense, but it's also and in other deeper senses as well. And it's magic. It's magic. It's philosophy in like a big sense, and it's magic.
What a wonderfully rich answer. I mean, that I think that was wonderful. I've said wonderful three times now. Um,
Yeah.
the fact that it was extremely clear and you did a really great job of like differentiating between all of the three major elements in phenomenology. And just looking at your enormous output of academic and scholarly work, especially on Hedwig Conrad-Martius, I knew exactly that you were the perfect person for this episode and participating in the series. Where do you think we should move now in our discussion and our dialogue?
Her philosophy has a really, really interesting critique of Heidegger that is very powerful. And in fact, I mean, that was kind of like one of the main projects of the Bergzabern Circle in their phenomenology library, the phenomenology house, and all their activities was to promote phenomenology of the early Göttingen type, to house the Reinach Nachlass and reverentially like study in that style, but also to counter the existential phenomenology of Heidegger, which Conrad-Martius has described as like a death heroism, a death heroism. All the being towards death. I mean, there's value to all this stuff, and she appreciates that as well. But here's the critique of Heidegger. Okay, because I gave you like the threefold like critique of or the situating real ontology in relation to transcendental and eidetic. But you could also say there's the Husserlian, the Conrad-Martius type, and then Heidegger's issue is take the title being and time, right? And and Heidegger himself would counter like there, well, freedom and stuff is where it's going, but um, but being here means like finite being, and time, is time in the context of temporality, and so like Edith Stein, Conrad-Martius provides this bigger picture of infinity. So the finite needs to be situated in infinite being and in the beyond of being, which is infinity and nothingness. I mean, there are important ways of distinguishing these things for certain purposes. And then on the other hand, time is in the context of eternity. And in Conrad-Martius, this is actually a hyperspace theoretical physics as well as in so many other ways. What she calls the Aeonische Raumzeit-Einheit is this like it's a way of talking about time in like a theoretical physics sort of way, that is developing from her critique of Einsteinian relativity, in a philosophical way from her book Die Zeit, from the early 60s. Um, and on like page one, she's citing Aristotle, Plato, and Plotinus. Okay, and then she gets more into this concept that she develops in this work. But actually, in 1939, the first edition of Der Selbstaufbau der Natur, the self-construction of nature, um, she's also doing quantum theory, Heisenberg. So very early, Heisenberg quantum theory philosophical interpretation, and what she comes to there is um, is a similar kind of activity that later in the 60s, um, she refers to or invents a new category of space-time, a different dimensional continuum, as a sort of like really a hyperspace, um, you know, theoretical physics of its own. So there's the Aeonische Raumzeit, the eternity, and it's specifically the fourth dimension. And this she has in common with a number of anthroposophical and like Blavatsky and like theosophical other thinkers, and other like scientists who are not like associated with any of that stuff as well. Um, Especially in the Kritischer Realismus camp or paradigm of practicing science in Germany then at the time. Um, and then she also has this concept in the context of quantum theory of the apeirische Raumzeit-Einheit, and this means the apeiron. So there's eternity or aeon, aeonische, and apeiron, which is infinity, right? Anaximander and Thales, this apeiron, the principle of all things. So she affirms these things in her way. She also affirms like Aristotle throughout her career, her philosophy that the self-construction activity, this is the soul. This is entelechy, a la Aristotle. she's not just straight up adopting these philosophers dogmatically, but she's seeing them as heuristic devices, their contributions as contributing something to the actual reality and truth, of reality, in a like, systematic way. So she doesn't just adopt these thinkers, but she cites them and she develops them and she critiques them as well. Um, but she really like renews them, reforms them for the modern age. And then this not only does she like prepare them, but she uses them like Aristotle and etc. She uses them, employs her real ontological method and develops things very similar to like Aristotle's entelechy by critiquing Hans Driesch and his concept of entelechy and critiquing all these other thinkers like Darwin, other like modern scientists who've been very influential. She makes her position relative to them, you know, um, and in so many works, and she covers fields like phytology and botany and psychology, evolutionary theory in so many different ways, it's there's a evolutionary anthropology, what's called descent theory, um, and yeah, I mean theoretical physics in the 1960s with her books Der Raum and Die Zeit, um, you know, and really she was doing all this like all along. It's just these are like dedicated researches, dedicated like contributions to different fields. But what's really cool about that, and she was also recognized in her day as a great natural scientist. And I like to use the Latin to describe what she really was practicing this philosophia perennis et scientia naturalis perennis. Okay. She was doing philosophy, but showing using this core philosophical method that applies to all the different sciences, which is also a way of showing the synthesis of all the sciences and of mathematics. I mean, you can expand on this. It's really about unity in a divine kind of way, which shows the fundamental spirit of an influence of the Romantics, and like for me, it's I'm really into Nicholas of Cusa, so the infinite sphere that he talks about, yeah, so this is something she wants this power of like being very direct. She says a lot, direct, getting showing how everything gets its being and its meaning from ultimately from the infinite, right? From God, for her, from God. Okay, but when I say like for her, I'm trying to qualify it for a general audience. She's not like a dogmatic Christian. She is not like today's like evangelical naivete, that we intellectuals famously critique. No, she's appreciating this broader context. And ultimately, in certain works about Rudolf Bultmann's demythologization thesis, she even develops her real ontology as a real mythology, or the opposite of demythologization. Instead of demythologizing this project of like naturalizing, for example, the Gospels and saying that they're, these historical accounts of, these useful stories or whatever. No, she embraces the meaning of for example that, but also any myth, right? There's like a place in the cosmos noetos for absolutely everything in her book, um, which means you can place all these entities all over the place. And we found this cool diagram, for example, of the big picture that I mentioned. Um, I know it's hard to read this. You can't really read this, and it's all the glare, but basically, like, there's the Urgeistige und or this is the it's backwards. Um, so the primordial spirit, or the world spirit, she calls it. The primordial soul, or the world soul. Okay. Or materialis, this is the prote hule, or the prima materia. And then over here we have the or etherisches, or the primordial ether. And then here's light over by the ether, you know? And then there's like all these relations. So this is like a crystal system, which is a term that Husserl uses um in some of those lectures that she attended. And he goes really into like this crystal system these relations of these like primordial causes and stuff. I mean, uh, you don't hear about that too much, and I'm kind of like building on something Husserl said in one of these things, but it's clear to me that you know, she's doing this. She's actually doing it. Um, and this is just like one drawing of like the big picture. Here's people, man, mensch here in the middle. And then there's animals and plants and soul life and soul essences, spirit essences. I mean, this is cool, right? I mean, this is an example of like a big picture that I keep referring to because it's a simple intuitive idea, right? These are like the fruits of her uh essence of real being, uh thinking or scientific investigation.
You're describing here from her her earlier work in phenomenology to this expansive universal real ontology. It sounds just unbelievable, even from the diagram you showed me to all of the how everything is intricately connected. Maybe comparing her to someone is not very charitable, but she just sounds like such a fantastic philosopher with so many different rich and layers that I'm so excited that I'm learning about this from you.
Yeah, and as far as Fichte, for instance, there's like a earlier concept of phenomenology, in Kant and yeah, Lambert, the Neue, the new organon. Okay. In there, the last part, the third part is a phenomenology as like doctrine of truth or doctrine of illusion and discerning the truth. You know. But in Fichte, phenomenology is Scheinslehre, and ontology, of course, is Seinslehre. I mean, there's synonyms for these things, of course, but this is a cool like homonym in German for what the relationship is between phenomenology and ontology. So again, this is in Fichte. Um, Seinslehre and Scheinslehre, of course, are about being and being seeing being or the shining and the showing, right? And of course this transforms in Hegel, radically. This transforms in Husserl. These things are very different, right? And in Heidegger, these are all very very different, but the spirit of it all, is phenomenology is about appearances and ontology is about being, but the two of them are fundamentally important components to philosophy in general, or even to the project of human being or human thinking, human knowing, or being in a human, specifically human way, and so this word shine, this is also a word that Conrad-Martius is employing programmatically in the beginning. Her dissertation is called the Erscheinungslehre, and but light is really important to her, appearance, and she goes into this. She has like a real like all of these sciences that she goes into and all these essays, they're like palatable, you could say, in like a natural, like in a theoretical or speculative scientific way. They're all like perfectly applicable sciences. So as Conrad-Martius becomes like a more well-known figure in philosophy, we will be able to see people applying it, or people are invited to apply it to different areas, different theoretical sciences. And so I know that, for example, there are people interested in quantum loop gravity, quantum wave gravity, who are like interested in Conrad-Martius's work about this stuff. This is just an example. There's so many sciences. She was so well known that she was doing radio interviews during during her day. She was recognized, and she did these radio interviews with a famous radio personality. That's like podcasts and TV today, right? It has this method that applies to so many sciences that we should be doing this today. And if we do it, we'll find this unity that even like Husserl was after. Like for him it was the theory of theory forms. That's what phenomenology ultimately is supposed to be, is this theory of all possible theories, right? And this is also the Mannigfaltigkeitslehre, which is in a weird way, it's kind of like set theory too. It's like remember Husserl is a mathematician. So Conrad-Martius is not a mathematician. There is a book review of a cybernetician, mathematician, that gives us a little gleaning on her views of certain mathematical and cybernetic concepts and the mathematization of nature, etc. But you know, it's really cool to see the unity of all of this thought in this very act of trying to imagine um, things coming into being from nothingness or from the infinite, descending in all directions to there being something, and not just like a seed or a rock or whatever, but like ideas and everything that actually comes about. So like it sounds like a Christian or even more specifically an anthroposophical sort of worldview, spiritual scientific worldview, because it is okay, but it's also doing it in a unique way. So she critiques the Romantics, she critiques Aristotle, but she's also what she's doing ends up being like even more true to what they're doing. We are the true positivists. Well, Conrad-Martius is the real philosopher. So the project of like the idealism of Fichte, right? This is the Young Idealist series, right? Is also called real ontology. And there's real politic and etc. Right? This is it, man. This is the truth and reality, and that's what she provides. So the whole like interest in Heidegger these days is kind of really cool for her. Even though it's contrary to her, I think it kind of gets the foot in the door for this opening of the question of being. And at some point soon, also, I want to kind of share with you her metaphor that she uses in the beginning of her early critique of being in time, that gives you a good image of like her opinion about Heidegger and what she also has to offer. Heidegger's Being in Time, a review by Hedwig Conrad-Martius. Martin Heidegger's work Sein und Zeit, which has shaken the spirits of the present so deeply and is still highly topical despite its appearance years ago, remains a mystery at the actual source of its monumental nature. We have to use a picture. It is as if, with tremendous force, wise circumspection, and persistent tenacity, a door that has been unopened for a long time and almost no longer openable is blown open and immediately slammed again, locked and barricaded so strongly that it is impossible to reopen, it seems. After the promising roar of departure, the hopeless silence of closed and abandoned entrances, exclamation mark. And then she goes on in this essay to employ this idea of a key, and that how the human ego, Dasein, in a way, like is the key, the cornerstone, the highest point, and also the most fleeting, and she calls and then even in this first paragraph, down to the last root destructive nature of Heidegger's worldview, the harrowing paradox of a deeply nihilistic character. Towards the end, she refers to his work as death heroism. And she goes into proofs of God of the philosophical mystics like Descartes and etc. Um, and what she's doing in here, and she brings up the doorway again. She keeps talking about this picture of the door, and she has a lot to say about it in this essay, but she also employs this metaphor really all over the place because it's a useful one, but especially in the case of Heidegger when it's deployed. She says it's also not only a door that has been locked for centuries. So everyone, not just philosophers, but everyone perks up their ears. They're like, "What? You're opening the door on the question of being?" And she agrees. He is like she's doing it too. It's something that paradigmatically like maybe couldn't occur for centuries. And then finally it's reopened, and then what? It's shut again and locked and bolted. And he's like, you know, here's the door, and he's like pointing to it, gesturing to it. His philosophy is like, here it is, and her point is she's critiquing him, right? Is that he's getting something wrong or what it is, she calls it also an artistic seal. This door is sealed, but it's also like an artistic seal, like a magic seal. She says at the end, this is the last little paragraph. Is it this sober death heroism, this unique glorification of the ultimate nullity of being through which Heidegger's philosophy worked so sensationally? This is a funky translation. Okay. Um, or conversely, is it the premonition that under this artistic seal lies the opposite of what the seal wants to lead you to believe, and what is actually the longing of an entire generation? So, and there's one more sentence. We do not know, nor is it whether the man who wrote the enigmatic work is really the atheist he claims to be. A very small and yet so infinitely great border crossing. And this atheism, which is destructive to the core, turns into deeply founded mysticism. So so much it's setting the stage for a dialectical maneuver. I think that when Conrad-Martius's philosophy becomes more prevalent, I think translated into English, I think that the soil is prepared for something really powerful, really profound. A little, she calls it a border crossing, a term she uses with this idea of the image of the door throughout her work, because that's kind of the key result or fruit of this method, right? A method is like a way, right? A path, the meta hodos, right? The method becomes this entity that she calls the originary movement, the Urbewegung, or the Urdynamic. And this, I think you also find this in other romantic philosophers as well. This originary motion or activity or dynamism is that of coming into being from, for example, nothingness, or in your imagination, like the idea of pure and radical nothingness, and then suddenly like something comes into being. So this is the idea of creation. It's also the idea of the Big Bang and other such things like the idea of a black hole singularity and event horizon, and stuff like that is very useful for imagining what this activity or this imageless image, right? You can't really have an image of it, but you picture like a dot or a point or something, in like a distinction, right? And so this is actually why I work on Conrad-Martius and Laws of Form by Spencer Brown, something we're not talking about, but it's about the first distinction. And she calls it the crossing, the border crossing. Spencer Brown, it's the cross. It's also called Spencer Brown's doorway. So anyway, I mean, this is why my dissertation takes these two very different thinkers together. But the point is, she says with a slight transformation of what's going on with Heidegger, we get the most deeply founded mysticism. And this is also something she talks about throughout her work in different places, existential mysticism, etc. Sometimes she's critiquing these things, but she's also in certain essays telling us her own spiritual scientific activity, including meditation. She said, like to quote her, like, some people will use drugs, she says, but you could also like these ecstatics, use meditative ecstatic practices. And this idea of ecstasy is also the fundamental method as well, because the coming into being is an ecstasis of the nothing or of God, the absolute infinite, right? So the absolute infinite is just overwhelming overflowingness that can't even grasp itself because it's beyond being. It's the ultimate reality. This is me now, right? But this is how I understand these things, right? It's the overwhelming overflowingness, but then there has to be this like difference, this distinction between the overwhelming overflowingness, which absolutely overwhelms everything, and it's just like the Dharmakaya, pure white light, or whatever, nothingness, right? Why is there something rather than nothing, right? The famous question, right? Wouldn't that be simpler, easier? Why are we talking here? Why does the earth exist? What is this, isn't it like simpler or easier for there to just be nothing, right? But the answer to this seems to be like, but because there is nothing, so called, right? The emptiness, which is fullness kind of thing, like the Bohemian Das Nichts, right? Because there is this ultimate truth, which we can know both in a negative way and in a positive way, which is weird, and that's mysticism. Um, we can have um, this idea of like things coming into being, and that's her method. Things coming into being means things coming into their reality. And so things like that have substance, and there's all sorts of substance. Her thing is a more fundamental substance, spiritual substance, and there's spiritual stuff or spiritual material. And this is another way of dividing things, another twofold. The very activity of mind is making these distinctions in order to say, like, I'm going to pick up this book. I got to make the distinction between the book and the stack of books and the air around it so my body can come and get the book. Um, so everything has to do with these distinctions, and we naturally always make these distinctions and cross them. There is no distinction without the crossing or the dynamic activity, right? So all of nature and all of absolutely everything, all of possible existence, anything we can think of or feel, is an activity, a crossing, a coming into being. Oh, Thomas Aquinas, like with Edith Stein, is a huge influence on Conrad-Martius. Edith Stein's a big influence on Conrad-Martius, but the whole idea of like the act and potency and act book, the analogia entis of Conrad-Martius's friend Pessoa, right? And just this whole Thomistic philosophy. She's got a whole essay on Thomistic philosophy and how important it is, and his concept of the prima materia, the protehule, um, how Thomas is this rock, of solidity and how it implies this whole like, you know, uh, levels of being, modes of being, and that's what her philosophy is about. So another like twofold. There's this fundamental coming into being, right? But then it's divided into the ecstatic activity. It like wants to come into being, but it wants to keep going, right? And get out of being, go back to the infinite or back to the nothing or whatever, right? And so that's an activity in one direction, but then there's this activity in the other direction where it wants to sink into itself, so like sunkenness or absorption and the Enthiebungsdynamic or the rising, these are like two different activities, kind of like the Timaean, the same and the different, right? The circle of the same and the circle of the different are keeping everything together. And the idea of entelechy, it's being the same, staying itself, or however you want to describe that, right? Something is both heteron, chi heteron. It's absolutely transforming and disappearing. It has that what we call entropy, but it also has ectropy. She doesn't use that word. She uses ecstasy a lot, but the anthroposophists sometimes employ this early word people don't know, ectropy. Sometimes with a C, sometimes with a K. But it's like light or the rising dynamic.
Could you maybe elaborate on Stein and Martius's relationship?
Yeah,
And
there's a
then,
really
and then I think maybe after that, talk about what you're working on, and then if you'd like, we could wrap up the discussion.
yeah,
Unless you
that
have
sounds great.
more to bring up, because you're doing such a great job of this.
Yeah, there's this one particular episode in the life of Edith Stein that's really important. Um, she would agree, and that's her conversion to Catholicism. Her biography is called Life in a Jewish Family. She was raised Jewish. She's Jewish, um, and and then she went to school, and she like really pursued this life of the mind. So I imagine it, she's kind of like at that stage, she's kind of like your typical college student today, where you're like, it's not your priority whether, maybe it is that you're an atheist, or you're, whatever kind of religion, and so she was like a kind of like atheist in a certain sense, right? In a sense from which she converted, and not to her original Judaism, but to in particular to Catholicism, which is interesting. Conrad-Martius, the Schobdacher church that she was a part of, is not Catholic, it's Protestant. And in fact, to be her godmother that day, she had to get an exception or something from the church in order to play that role. But here's what happened on December 31st, 1921. Um, she was down at the farm with the Conrads. Saint Teresa of Avila's book, um, what is it? Her biography, her autobiography, right? And she couldn't put it down. She was up all night getting all into this, and it did something to her, and this is something that scholars should really get into. What did it do? What's her how can we go into it. We have some detail here. So she, she stayed up all night and she was like, "Oh my God, I have to do this. I have to become baptized as a Catholic." Totally. Um, mind you, it was New Year's Day, you know. Um, so that's kind of like you know, maybe there's like a millennialism or a centuryism or a annualism or whatever you want to call that happening here too. But so she went down the street and in Bergzabern. I got to go make the walk, from the church to the house and back to the closest church, very very close. In fact, on YouTube there's a little, I made a phenomenological pilgrimage with Joaquin Feldes. I just, clips of like, was doing selfies of like him describing all the places to us. Um and I did this, I did like a little introductory video at Conrad-Martius's grave I found in Munich, another cool little story. But yeah, she converted, and she had to wear a white baptismal gown, and so maybe it was like very deeply symbolically significant, like it sounds, or maybe there was just nothing else really white to use. But in any case, she used Conrad-Martius's wedding dress from the 1912 wedding of Conrad-Martius and Theodor Conrad. So it was like a phenomenology wedding dress, right? That became the baptismal gown of Edith Stein. And there's like a little piece of it encased in jewels in the cathedral at Speyer. And there's like other saints. There's like a femur bone. um, so anyway, that's Conrad-Martius's wedding dress that Edith Stein wore. So this is just like a biographical story to like highlight, their relation. They did a lot of hanging out in the 1920s. That was the early 1920s. They made these like mystery plays and actually had a bunch of literary output. And one assumes this is like of a like the plays maybe, or maybe it was more philosophical work, or maybe it was just too mystical or whatever. But for some reason, either because it was, not judged as good, or maybe because of some spiritual purpose, the term used is auto da fe, right, of immolation, or a burning of oneself, or of one's material. They She burned it all. Conrad-Martius burned it all in the end of the 1920s. It's another really cool, weird little spiritual thing that happened in this like biographical story level. But I would add one more thing about Edith Stein. Her two really like metaphysical books, Finite and Eternal Being and Potency and Act. These contain not only numerous references to Conrad-Martius, but as well large quotes from like the Metaphysical Conversations and other works by Conrad-Martius, to talk about like time and eternity, to talk about being and the nature of being, and to talk about like plants and animals and the nature of the soul and stuff like that. So they're very much dovetailing. They're I don't know, kind of like best friends, as phenomenological philosophers, career wise. So that's like a really cool, like, couple stories about the two of them. The dissertation that I'm working on, it's called Universal Ontology of the Infinite Sphere. And it's actually originally what I like, discovered within or whatever, back like as a teenager, growing up in San Diego. Like I like, experimented with my consciousness and such, and I came to the conclusion that there has to be this completed metaphysical system, of like truth and reality, because like even though there's all these different philosophies and different doctrines and opinions and stuff, there's a true like, maybe it's like a systemless system, but there's like a kind of systematicity, or an economy or an order, that one can discern from within, that accounts for, justifies and clarifies and everything, right? So this was kind of like my lofty idea, right? I think all philosophers have, deep down some like lofty hope, just like all the generation who were looking to this magic seal of what Heidegger was doing, with hope, with promise, and then they were like crushed or held in suspense at this door of being, right? With Conrad-Martius, this door is blown open. She says, all doors are blown open. She says when we like, you know, get good with God or whatever, right? That's what she's talking about. But it's the infinite. It's the absolute infinite, you know? And through experimentation with the expansion of consciousness and stuff, you can easily actually come to this conclusion of all there is the absolute infinite, the overwhelming overflowingness of ultimate reality, you know? And so with the universal ontology, it's a universal ontology of reality, and the ontology of reality, can lead as a core method to the ontology of ultimate reality. Okay, so that's what my dissertation is about, and the like philosophy figures that I'm largely employing are Hedwig Conrad-Martius to everything we've talked about, right? And also this mathematician George Spencer Brown, whose 1969 book Laws of Form John Lilly was using in the isolation tank, and it's really just a really powerful way of talking about this first distinction in a like blank context. Call it the void, like he does, or the unmarked state, or really what it is it's like shunyata or das Nichts. It's the absolute infinite. It's God. And so there's this ultimate reality, and its porosity, its fecundity is what gives everything the reality that it has. Okay, but then there's the opposite of it, which is penultimate reality. And through its very like, formal penury, this infinitesimal point of which there can be only one, the absolute singularity, it in a way, in a weird way, it contains absolutely everything, but it's that Urbewegung, that Ur-dynamic that Conrad-Martius talks about. It's the first distinction that Spencer Brown talks about in respectively their material and universal and real ontological and respectively on the other side, the formal ontological ways. But it's the same entity at the core of everything, right? So this original being, coming from the beyond of being, this pure beingness in a very like Parmenidean sort of way, is that center of the infinite sphere. It's also the periphery, okay, but it's just this like original differentiation contained in the very idea of the infinite sphere, which is like a simple intuition, but also a device that it would just be not a sphere, just the infinite, right? Just beyond grasping, right? But there's a center. And because there's a center, the infinite is a sphere. Okay, so that's respectively ultimate and penultimate reality. This is also the point at which the pen strikes the page, in the book of life. It's the life. And then there's anti-penultimate reality, which is like revelation flipped out. Just this, the ultimate reality show. Everything that comes about as a result of these primordial operations, or not operations, like these entities, right? God and the spirit, or the infinite and being. And these two things, which are absolutely primordial, are what make everything, what it is. And through their primordial relation, that opens up absolute relativity. And that's what allows everything to come about as the mutually co-arising forms of all the possibilities of meaning configurations or whatever. So that's the idea of the universal ontology of the infinite sphere. So it's like taking Conrad-Martius and applying her method to the idea of the infinite sphere. So that's my dissertation. Okay, and this has also led me to like develop the Spencer Brown Society and being involved in phenomenology societies, and just starting this project of what I think universal ontology requires is a transformation of all of humanity to this universal humanity. So that's kind of going to be the conclusion of my dissertation, is this thesis that once we have the thesis universalis, which is the universal ontology of ultimate reality and anti-penultimate reality and penultimate reality, we can finally like find a way of rising to the occasion, and being good people, peace on earth, and all that, probably, hopefully.
Well, when you finish, I hope you'll come back on here and talk about it with me, because I would love
Yeah.
that. I want to thank you so much for navigating us through one of the most complex thinkers I've ever heard about, actually, and doing it in such an exciting and passionate and very meticulous and articulate way. You did it so nicely of like layering all of these great concepts and bringing in so much. I mean, Husserl, you brought in Shaler, you brought in Stein, you brought in all of these thinkers, and you really did such a great job of just lucidly disclosing everything. So I want to thank you so much for being here.
There's going to be a little Conrad-Martius workshop. Daniel Neumann is hosting with Tony Steinbach here at Stony Brook University. I live right over here. I intend to be a part of this as well. So there's that, and then also in New York here, the North American Society for Early Phenomenology is having their conference here at St. John's this summer. So that's another like Conrad-Martius venue. So I think it's important to keep these things in mind, in connection to um, for philosophy, right?
I will post all of those links in the actual description for the video. I'll also link all of your essays that people can take a look at on Conrad Martius and other ideas that you have on academia and Phil papers as well.
Great.
So thank you again so much for everything.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.